afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the August Budget Finance Committee meeting for the City of Franklin. The first item on the agenda is call to order, and I'll do a roll call vote on that. Alderman Potts, how do you vote?
Present.
Chair votes present, and let the record show that Alderman Peterson and Alderman Baggett are not present, so we do not have a quorum, so we will not be able to vote on anything. Do we want to go, do you want to do the minutes? I mean, or save them for the next meeting?
Put that on the next meeting.
Put them on the next meeting then. All right, let's go to item 2 then, consideration of draft resolution 2022-51, declaring the intent of the City of Franklin, Tennessee to reimburse itself in an amount in a not-to-exceed amount of $26,150,000 for certain projects expenditures with the proceeds of general obligation bonds, notes, or other debt obligations to be issued by the city. Christine?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And this is, I guess, the highlight, the first item on our new business agenda. We wanted to spend a few minutes with this committee on a topic that is very important to how we finance our capital program here at the City of Franklin for our governmental projects. And the last time we issued a bond for our general government projects was back in 2019. So it's not been too many years, but it's been about 4 years by the time we're ready to issue the next one. So we just thought it would be a good time to spend a few minutes together, go over a little bit of the background of what governmental bonds are and what the purpose is, how they're repaid. And then we'll also talk about the last 2 bond issues and the programs that we finished with the 2017, 2019 bonds. So you get a sense of what those bonds were used for. And then we'll also we'll finish with a staff proposal for what the projects will be for the next bond issue, which timing-wise, we're already calling a proposed Series 2023 bond issue. But all of that being said, we are asking for our full board to consider this resolution 2022-51, which would allow us to reimburse the city with bond proceeds from this future bond issue that should occur in 2023. So there is an immediate action item for this fall, but we want to kind of set the stage and give you some time to reflect on that as well. So, of course, here at the City of Franklin, we do have a capital program, and our Board of Mayor and Aldermen approved projects on a 10-year window. And the last capital improvement program that we put in place, less than half of the program was funded with general obligation bonds. Most of our program is cash funded, but we do want to highlight what you can finance with governmental bonds, and then we'll kind of walk through how we have used those bond proceeds recently.
So Christine, so when we looked at that capital project, 600-something million, we projected we had revenue coming in to be 325 million.
380.
300, whatever. Yep. So then half of that, then, we're paying up front
With
or
cash.
as we go, in
Over
cash.
half, yeah.
Yes, whether it be
Close to 60%, actually.
60%?
Yeah, is paying with some form of cash, whether that's general fund cash or impact fee from road impact or parkland or facilities tax. Those are your typical sources that we're using to help pay as you go. And over the several years we've been doing the 10-year plan, that has moved from about 50-50 to more 60-40, with the 60 being cash, pay as you go.
So just a description of what you can finance with governmental bonds. I guess I would talk about 2 different categories of projects. They're new construction or projects that expand capacity or extend the useful life of an existing governmental asset. So just listed out several different categories of projects, and you'll recognize that the City of Franklin has capital projects that fit in many of these categories. Certainly roads, bridges, sidewalks are a big, significant component of our capital program. We do have, of course, a municipal water and sewer system. We We don't necessarily have public school facilities, but there are some of those close by with Franklin Special School District, Williamson County Schools that have their own taxing authority. Public safety equipment, for us, we have in recent years funded some of our replacement fire apparatus with governmental bonds. We also, of course, have parks and recreation facilities. For example, the Southeast Park, the bridge that has just been constructed there is a governmental project. Other governmental buildings, that would be, for example, fire stations. Our most recent fire station was funded with cash, as Eric was describing, that we use cash to fund many of our capital projects, but fire stations are examples of governmental buildings. Our police building that we have here at the city was funded, of course, with a bond issue. We also have a proposal that we'll be talking about more later this month about City Hall, would be a governmental building as well. So in essence, there is a component of governmental use and public use for governmental bonds. The security for specifically the type of bond issue that we're just talking about in detail today is the general obligation pledge. And this is a pledge of the property tax base of the city of Franklin. And so in this case, the principal and interest payments for a new 20-year bond issue, for instance, it's secured by the full faith and credit, which is the levying of property taxes here in the city. Just wanted to make that distinction that general obligation GO, we call these sometimes the acronym GO bonds, they're not secured by a mortgage on any particular property. It's different than a private sector type financing where certainly there's not a lien on a fire station or a fire apparatus. It truly is, the credit is that, it's a sort of an intangible, but it's that property tax levy that if for some reason a government does not fulfill its obligation to repay the principal and interest upon the schedule that's determined when you issue the bonds, the bondholders actually have the right to go to court to compel that issuer to raise property taxes to repay that debt. It's actually the strongest credit that a local government can issue under, is that willingness to increase your property taxes and set your property taxes to be able to repay your debt. And furthermore, states also have the right to protect that pledge in different ways to its own local governments. And some of those examples are, some states require local governments to have referendums to issue additional general obligation debt. That's an example of, state of Georgia requires that. There are also states that take a little different approach, that they required a statutory level staff approval at the state for issuing certain types of debt by their cities and counties. And Tennessee does some of this. In fact, a couple of examples in Tennessee, if you want to refinance general obligation debt, the state has to approve that on a staff level before that you're allowed to approve a bond resolution. And so when we have done that in the past, and as part of that due diligence, we ask the state for permission. They issue a letter, and we provide that to the Board of Mayor and Aldermen that the state's going to allow that refinancing.
But the state of Georgia, any GO bonds has to go before the state legislature?
Well, no, in Georgia, it's actually the registered voters in
Okay.
that county or city, and that referendum requirement is on new money. It's not actually on refinancing, but if you wanted to do a new jail or a jail expansion and fund it with bond proceeds, that's actually, or a new school, that would be, or expansion of a school, that's that's actually a bond referendum. So that's an example of what they require at the state level to try to make sure that local governments issue general obligation debt that they're willing to repay. But Tennessee takes a little different approach, that there's more state level staff approval for general obligation debt, as well as there's also an after the fact check on our annual budget. In Tennessee, all cities and counties must have your annual budget approved by the state comptroller's office after the elected body approves the budget, and they are checking to make sure that we have appropriated the annual debt service. And so when we receive that approval letter, which we just did the other day from the state for our new budget, they've checked to make sure that we're going to repay our current year debt service. So there's, states are allowed to put in place either restrictions or processes to make sure that local governments are repaying their debt. But I will point out that there's very few states that say that if you get in trouble, that they were going to secure your debt for you. Most of them set these rules because they do not intend to step in if a local cannot pay their debt. And then just a snapshot of some important dates in the history of tax-exempt bonds for governmental purposes in the United States. And the first codified exemption of interest for municipal bonds was from 1913, the Revenue Act of 1913. And going back in time to that era, that year may be something that strikes a memory, because while I had to look up actually what month that the Revenue Act of 1913 occurred, that's the same year that the 16th Amendment to the Constitution was ratified, that said that Congress was allowed to set an income tax. So in February of 13, there had been federal income taxes off and on since the Civil War, but they would get in place and they would get pulled back. Our tax system at the federal level was more tariff-based. But in 1913 was when we had the income tax program, the way we think of now, was set up. And so by the end of 1913, here comes this first codified exception for interest on municipal bonds. So this has been around a long time, and there has been a little bit of, we've modernized throughout the course of that. Probably while there was changes, there were some changes in tax law in 1968. 1986 was a monumental year for the Tax Reform Act of 86, because a great deal of what we might consider loopholes in that tax exemption statute were closed. And in fact, what we as staff are asking you to consider as a board for this reimbursement resolution was required in 1986 by that action. So what had been happening was a local government maybe would get short of cash, and they would look back in their history, when did we cash fund a capital project? Let's pick one. And then they would issue bonds and reimburse themselves for something that happened maybe 10 years, could be longer. And the IRS and the federal government said, that's not the purpose of a tax exemption. You, the local government, state government, need to decide that you're going to reimburse yourself, and on a fairly timely basis issue those bonds. You can't just go back and help your cash flow situation by issuing tax-exempt bonds. So there's you a little bit of a story from 86. Did many things, but certainly that's something that was a line of demarcation in this process. We move along to 2017 was the next big change, and we were not allowed to advance refinance tax-exempt bonds anymore after 2017. And so now we're allowed to refinance bonds when they actually reach a call date, but we can't go a year or two early when rates are low and refinance for low rates. So that was a big change, and it actually was something that, those of us who work with bonds were sad to see happen, because that was opportunities that we used to reduce our interest expense to our local governments and their taxpayers, and we hated to see that go away. But then finally, I would leave you with that this tax exemption is not protected by the U.S. Constitution. It is statutory, and our professional organizations, whether it be finance officers or city managers or mayors, are consistently providing to our elected officials at the federal level how important tax-exempt bonds are to being able to put our infrastructure in place and to keep it up. That if we had to issue at taxable rates, it would be very costly, and we wouldn't be able to do the capital projects that we plan to do if there was not that tax exemption. So there shouldn't be a misconception that it could ever go away, because it's not protected in that way. And then also I won't read this to you, but wanted to give a little background. What we're talking about in this program are bond proceeds being used for public governmental uses, that's tax exempt. It is secured by that full faith and credit pledge. It is typically, of course, the most secure, highest credit rating. Here at the City of Franklin, that's a AAA bond rating, the highest rating that you can have. There are other ways to finance tax-exempt bonds through revenue pledges, and we actually do have one other pledge here that has a credit rating at the City of Franklin. We have a water and sewer revenue pledge, which is a AA2 rating, very high-quality rating, but typically revenue bonds are not considered as secure as the tax-exempt or as the pledge of your full faith and credit on your property taxes. And states may also limit issuance of debt by its local government for governmental purposes. So states do get involved, and they some states more than others really want their governments to issue bonds just for governmental purposes. There are also governmental bonds which may be issued by governments but are for their obligations that benefit non-governmental activities, and these are generally considered taxable. They look a little bit more like private financings. They're not secured by these government revenues. They are secured by interest in property, such as actual piece of property with a construction on it, or also just the viability of that property for revenue streams. So the credit is based on the financial viability. Typically, if it has a credit rating, it's much lower than the traditional governmental pledge. There are federal limits on amounts of these bonds, and there are many states actually do disallow this type of activity. And the state of Tennessee is pretty strict on the issuance of these types of bonds by its local government. In fact, the state of Tennessee's Constitution states that no credit of a county or city shall be given or loaned to the aid of a person, company, association, corporation. And it does give a caveat of a referendum, but it's a very high bar referendum. It's not a majority referendum. So this is something that is allowed, that states may put limits on any sort of lending of credit by their cities and counties. And then this is the last background before we talk about the City of Franklin's debt directly. There are certain rules that I just wanted to highlight that there's, as you probably can tell from the presentation so far, there's lots of rules we follow for managing the city's debt. But these are some three really big ones. First of all, the uses of the bond proceeds must meet the tax-exempt requirements of the IRS, and that has to be actually certified by bond counsel. And we have a written opinion provided for every single one of our bond issues that states as such. And we also discuss each of the projects with our bond counsel. And our bond counsel will go through, ask questions just to make sure that everything meets the requirements. And then we have that written opinion. If anything changes with the uses of those assets during the life of the bond issue, it is the responsibility of staff to notify bond counsel and make sure that they all the federal rules that apply. And so we certainly always we want to make sure that bonds that are issued as tax-exempt bonds, governmental bonds, are used for a public purpose throughout the life of the bonds. Next, the city, in our case, we agree at the closing of the bonds to provide ongoing, continuing disclosure of financial reporting throughout the life of the bond issue, as well as there's a long list of material events that if one of these events happen, then as staff, we are required to disclose that within 10 business days. So that does speak to the need to have staff to be able to regularly monitor our bonds. If we ever have a material event, to file that. And most of the material events are kind of bad. There are a few that aren't. And in fact, in my 5 years with the city, I've only filed one material event, but it was for something really good. There's one of the material events is if you've had a change in a bond rating. It must be reported within 10 days. our water and sewer rating went from a AA3 to a AA2, so I got to report that within 10 days and have that disclosed. So that was a wonderful thing to report, but certainly there's a long list of things that could happen, such as not paying interest on time, not paying principal on time. If you have some sort of a natural disaster, there can be other things that that must be disclosed so that bondholders are aware that there's been a change in your situation. And then finally, wanted to point out that bond proceeds must be spent in a timely manner. The federal government doesn't want you to issue tax-exempt bonds and then have those sit in the bank for many years while you figure out what you want to do. They, in almost all cases, they want you to spend those proceeds within 3 years. And so that is part of when we put together a package for a bond issue, we talk very closely to our project managers to make sure that these are project amounts that will be spent within 3 years as required by the IRS. So you may see a project and say, is that the entire amount for this project? Because you know it's a long project, but we're focusing on a 3-year time period.
Christine, I was just going to ask, have there been any events that you're talking about that have happened in the past decade or recently that we've had to file within the 10-day timeframe?
The only one that I've had to do was the good one here for the ratings change.
Ah.
And when we, on the water and sewer, we had a ratings upgrade, and we of course, were happy to file that.
Okay.
We had an upgrade, I believe it was 2 years ago, Eric, close to it,
so.
when we had the water and sewer upgrade.
Yeah.
So it's something that I think years ago, there was a point that you could issue bonds and kind of set the paperwork on the shelf, and if as long as you paid your debt service on time, things just kind of rocked along. But it's become an active management process that the disclosures have got more, we've just have more disclosures we're required to do, more surveillance by the bond rating agencies, even for governments such as Franklin, who are doing some great things. We get asked a lot more questions. We recently worked with Moody's on some changes in their ratings criteria that we reviewed to make sure that we didn't see anything that jumped out at us, but we did that here recently. So there is a management process for governmental debt that it is more cumbersome because it's tax exempt, and the investors and the IRS are allowed more protections. And then finally, I do want to jump now into our own City of Franklin general obligation debt. And this is the graph, the same, I've just moved it up a year, but this is the same graph we looked at during the budget process of what we owe in remaining payments. Actually, the axis on the right axis should go out to 2039. It shows you the 2038, but our current outstanding debt service goes out to 2039. It's a favorable picture when you look at this because actually our maximum annual debt service, we're almost there in 2024. We have 2 bond issues that completely repay. They have final maturity in 24. And so you see that stair step down. I call it a stair step. So, and this is the same numbers that certainly when Michael works on debt capacity for the capital program, we are building in what we currently have to pay into what we can afford from projected revenues. But it's certainly repayment of what we already have is something that he builds into that modeling. So we do have we currently have outstanding principal of $121 million. We are paying a lot of principal right now because we are at the tail end of a couple of bond issues, and we have a couple more that pay off within the next 4 to 5 years. So this, to staff, this is a curve that we think looks very favorable, and certainly to be looking at a chart that ends in 2039 puts us in a good position for this next 2023 bond issue. The next, we'll look at what we spent the last 2 general obligation bonds on. And those 2 programs, 2017 and 2019, we have completed both of those programs. We are, of course, We finished the 2017 program in 2020, and we finished the 2019 program earlier this summer. So they're actually unaudited numbers because we just finished spending the 2019 program within the last month or so. But the 2017 program, we purchased 1 replacement fire apparatus. 2019, we purchased 2 replacement. When we add new stations, we do have cash from the facilities fund, which may be used to add to our apparatus, but we replace fire apparatus from city funds. So this is a replacement. Police vehicles in 2017, we typically replace our police vehicles with cash, but when we got to 2019, we had a catch-up to do on replacement police vehicles, and accounting rules have changed that we can't actually do the leasing programs that governments did several years ago, so we did a very shortly amortized portion of the 2019 bond issue to purchase about $2 million of police vehicles and get ourselves caught up with those replacements. In 17 bond issue, we did about $4.5 million for our share of a public safety communication system that was in conjunction with Williamson County and Brentwood, and that was a share for the city. We also did some improvements to both bond issues with our sanitation facility and on Century Court. And while the sanitation fund does pay the debt service for their portion, it is a governmental use, so it certainly can be borrowed in this manner. The next category is major road resurfacing, and this was something that in the 17 and 19 bond issues, we had a little over $4 million in that program. And it was a successful way to really, I believe, do some catch-up on major road resurfacing. We have our streets director and a streets assistant director with us today. And our streets director was involved in both of those programs. And certainly, we know in Tennessee our gas tax doesn't really keep up with the needs for our road resurfacing. These are our major road resurfacing that they certainly have had to get into areas of the city which are commercial areas, retail areas. So this is a really significant undertaking, but they do the very best they can to certainly work in those areas to keep the roads in great shape. And then finally, our largest categories: roads, bridges, sidewalks. Probably the biggest category of our capital program. In 2017, the largest project was Hillsborough Road Phase 2. In the 19 program, Franklin Road, which you still see going on, but we're on the tail end, as well as the bridge there at Southeast Park are part of the 19 program. So those 2 programs have, first one almost $27 million. The 2019 program was $35 million of infrastructure to the city. So now we'll unveil what we're requesting for the new 2023 general obligation bond program. And to start with, we are proposing replacement of 4 fire apparatus. And this is a little bit of a catch-up with fire apparatus, partly because it's taking so long to get fire apparatus. They stay in frontline service for approximately 15 years. They can be in backup service another 5 long-lived assets. Of these 4, 2 of them are 2006 models, and 2 more are 2009. And we have already ordered replacement of one of the 2006s. We ordered it summer of 21, and we will not get it until next summer of 23. And so in looking at that 3-year time period, replacing these 4 is really all that is feasible to receive during that 4-year time period, or the 3-year time period. We also we're proposing $6.3 million for major road resurfacing. In your packet was a proposal from the Streets Department for a number of stretches of a major road resurfacing. Certainly, there's quite a few. This is a 3-year request. They do keep up with what they would recommend for a longer period. And we also have a contract, though, that we have 1 more year of favorable pricing with our road resurfacing. And what the department has done to to calculate, to estimate what would be the rest of that of the next 2 years, they have looked at what other governments have received in pricing, which is about a 50% increase over our current contract. So they would like to do as much as they can next spring before the current contract ends. They have a couple of big stretches they'd like to do next spring as soon as the weather turns on this lower price contract, and then continue to work the rest of the 3-year period. Yes, sir. Oh, and then finally, the 2 large projects requested in the road and new park project category is the Southeast Park construction, which the city engineer is advising us that he's going to go out to bid later this calendar year. And that will help to solidify amounts and timing for what can be done in the next 3 years, as well as more right-of-way acquisition on Long Lane, which of course is a high-priority project for the board. And he is going to be able to do a little bit more fine-tuning on Long Lane and where it's at in the next 3 years here in the next few months as well. Any questions about these projects?
Yeah, Christine, I did have just a couple, just for awareness for me, as we're looking at fire apparatus and the replacement piece, as you were talking about the duration that it takes, and the delivery period is 12 to 24 months. And I know after speaking with, with Chief Johnson and some others, that it takes a while to build those. But how much has COVID impacted that lead time, and how does that impact when we're doing our budget right here? Are you having a forecast further out or plan further out? How did COVID, or where we are right now in COVID?
And the supply chain issues?
Yeah, and with supply chain and everything else. We think we're out of all of that, but there's still some impact. So what
there
what are we
definitely
seeing?
is. Well, and even the one piece that we ordered in July of '21, which is also which is a replacement of a 2006 model. The first projection was actually that we would receive that piece at the end of this calendar year. And as we were working on this staff proposal, we were given the updated information that's supposed to now be next summer. So there are still significant delays from 3 years ago when that same piece of equipment might have been still a 12-month. I mean,
Right.
it really has been about a year build for some time,
Okay.
but now we're seeing closer to the 12 to 24.
The 12's pushed out to the 24.
Yes.
For the most part. And
So-
that's what I think we're generally planning on that's our expectation now, is
Right.
it's more closer to that 2-year than the 1 or 1.5.
And Eric, that's actually where I was going is when we're looking at police and fire, do we need to, and I know we talked about this previously, when we looked at doing fleet replacement with the police, is we're going to pre-order now
Yep.
based off of the previous presentation. Are we anticipating doing more of that, or are we doing it now, and how far out do you think we're going to have to continue to do that?
Well, actually, Chief Johnson and his team has been working on the specs for these other 3, and we went ahead and said, get those ordered as soon as we can because of the long lead times. So they're almost probably finished with that process.
All we're waiting on now is.
Perfect timing, Chief.
Yes, sir. I was watching Facebook Live. Good afternoon. Yes, we have all the paperwork ready. We're just waiting to get the word go, because what we're also experiencing is not only build time, but price increases. I mean, we're looking at price increases occurring every 6 to 12 months. And when we talk about, the amount of money that we're going to save by, we're buying at today's price, but we're paying for it when it's completed. So it's a cost-saving measure as well.
Yeah, because we get the price locked in when we
Yes.
place the order. So there is some benefit both on the timing, getting in the queue for
Correct.
manufacturing, but also we get that price that, 6 months is going to change significantly if we wait. So we're trying to manage both those aspects.
Correct.
Okay.
In terms of the consumer vehicles, the other pieces of it, our fleet team is really keeping a close eye on that. They have a lot of communication. We actually got some good news just in the last week that some consumer vehicles, so like pickup trucks, SUV type vehicles from Ford, that we're gonna get those sooner, so we're moving those along. The board did a great job in helping us get in the queue a little early, as soon as we kind of knew what we're looking at. I already have Fleet looking at what they might need next year, and so we may have some more conversations about how we make sure our order gets in so that we can do the best job in managing when we get it and managing that cost aspect too.
And so I guess that's where, as Chief Johnson, as you were working on that, we're just looking at 4 replacement units right now. Do we need to consider, or was it discussed, additional units just based on where the supply chain is right now? And based on what we've previously approved for the budget, does it need to be looked at again based on how long it's
I think that's
taking?
what we've done. That's why,
Okay.
at last bond issue, we bought 2. This bond issue, we're buying 4.
Okay.
And so that's what Chief has shown both Christine and I is what's your outlook over a extended period of time? When we go from frontline use to backup, how all that's gonna fit. And so I think this is consistent with that thinking and an assumption that it's gonna take longer to get every piece.
Yeah, and these, and I appreciate that, and I figured that y'all were doing your homework and doing all those things, but it's also good to ask a question, so everybody
Absolutely.
who's
Great
watching
question.
online at Facebook or wherever it might be, that they're hearing these discussions.
And yes, the chief, he keeps up with all of the fire apparatus, and we know even the next 3, there was a gap. When you looked at that history, there was a couple of those pieces in '09, and then there was not another piece until 13 in this classification. So, but still, I mean, this is it's a heavy lift for this bond issue, but we know which are the next 3 that the chief's done a great job of keeping us informed on all that, so.
Okay. And I guess the last question that I have right here is, I know we've been talking fire, and I know that Chief Faulkner is at the police station now, but is there, since we don't have police listed here, and I know we talked about the fleet purchase
Yeah.
in the previous budget, was there any request or was there a need or discussion to add that here?
It's accommodated in your operating budget.
It is.
And that's how we typically prefer to do it. It
Okay.
was kind of an exception in the 2019 issue that we chose to do those to sort of help jumpstart a catch-up on it. But we're comfortable that we incorporate it, and I think that works better to incorporate it in our sort of operating budget. Now we've established this fleet fund as well. So
Okay.
I think we're doing it, but we're doing it through that mechanism, which fits those types of vehicles versus, you know, these fire apparatus, which higher dollar amount and then have a 20-year useful life. So I think we've got that, and we're fitting that in the right places in our budgets.
We've budgeted $1.4 million and some change for cruiser replacement in fiscal '23. That money, along with about $1.3 million, is appropriated in the capital vehicle fund intentionally, so that in case there are further delays, that money is already appropriated in that fund to accommodate cross-fiscal year concerns, similar to using bonds. If it takes longer to get them, we've at least already allocated those funds.
So what does that, how many vehicles does that equate to, do you know? What's the police got, 60, 70,000, 80?
I think we were looking between 61 and 70 the last,
Okay,
depending
that's right.
upon how much outfitting. You know, the goal has always been to try to get it. We took that large truncheon in the 2019 Series A bonds to catch up. The closer we can get to getting the total active fleet under warranty, the better off everybody is, and not still be running, you know, significantly older vehicles like we were 5 or so years ago.
Against that $1.9 million. What we're looking at now, those are that purchased $1,965,000 on that 2019. We still don't have all of those?
We do have all of those.
Yeah.
What I'm saying
have
is
all
that
of
we
Yeah.
we issued those to catch
Right.
up from the backlog, and we've been appropriating, with the exception of fiscal '21, the moment COVID hit and we pulled back temporarily. We've been averaging between $1 million and $1.4 million a year every fiscal year. In addition to that, to try to have active cruiser replacement, so we don't fall as behind.
Are we ready?
We're ready.
Yeah.
Yes. And then, also wanted to come back to the chart to show what debt service would look like after issuing the 23 bonds. We would extend debt service out to 2043, and while it is a final maturity of 20 years from issuance, it's actually, we have two pieces of the bond issue that are not financed out 20 years because we want to match the most conservative life for the assets. So fire apparatus, we actually amortize over 15 years, and the major road resurfacing portion, we amortize it at 12 years. So the average life is 10 years, and so while we do have a average annual debt service of 1.7 million that we would be adding in obligation, we actually have the maximum annual debt service for that bond issue fairly early because of those two pieces that we're amortizing shorter. So we do extend out to 2043, but as you see, we still have that stair step going down because we're being conservative in how we amortize for each category of projects. So we're here in August talking about the first step, which is the Board of Mayor and Alderman's consideration of a resolution that establishes the intent of the city to reimburse itself with general obligation bond proceeds. We had anticipated that you would like the full board to hear a condensed version of this at a work session before asking them to consider the resolution. Certainly is a lot of money, and it's a long period of time, so we want to give some time to digest that. But this would...
Christine, either that or Facebook, one of the two.
Oh, that's correct. But I do want to point out that this resolution, this first step in the process, that is not actually authorizing the issuance of debt. This is a first step that we would be able to reimburse ourselves with bond proceeds for this list of projects. We could go ahead and get started with aspects of this project between the date that the board approved the resolution and we issue the bonds. But it doesn't require you to issue this exact amount. You can issue a lower amount. If we have advisement from the city engineer of some timing changes, we can reduce that bond amount. If we have additional cash that we want to put into those projects, we can reduce that bond amount. So you still have two more actions that are tied to issuing bonds, and that would occur. Our timeline would be the very early part of 2023. We will have the advisement from the city engineer for Southeast Park construction, and we will also have his advisement on Long Lane. We'll fine-tune those amounts. The Board of Mayor Alderman, we first would come to this committee, but there are two resolutions. One resolution which allows the issuance of debt that's secured by the property tax. And then there's a much longer bond resolution which authorizes the issuance of the debt. And so we bring those to you at the same time. And then upon approval of those two resolutions, you authorize the mayor to execute sale and closing of the bonds once we've gone through the competitive process. So that would probably be, and this schedule would happen in the spring, March, maybe even April. So that concludes my presentation. I appreciate the dialogue that we've had, but certainly any other questions, we'd be glad to discuss with you.
Well, for my questions, I pretty well answered them as we went along. Jason, you got anything else?
I appreciate you asking. No, you guys answered our questions. I appreciate Chief Johnson stepping up and also providing details on that as well. So thank you all.
Well, and certainly thank you, because we do have this is a work group that we work on bond management together. So while I may be the facilitator, we have cooperation very close with our departments, and that's appreciates Steve Grubb and Jerry Hatcher from Streets Department. Mark Hilty's here, supports them, Chief Johnson, and we also have a great deal of support from our city engineer, Paul Holzen, and Eric is part of this process, and my colleagues in the finance department as well. So we appreciate that you acknowledge, because I know the whole committee, we do work together very closely, and we're thankful to have this support.
Team effort.
Since there is no quorum, let's go to item 3. Consideration of draft ordinance 2022-27, an ordinance of the City of Franklin, Tennessee, updating the budget administration threshold for consistency with new purchasing threshold of 50,000.
So really, items 3 and 4 both are in the same vein in terms of, you all in July adjusted some
Yes.
thresholds related to bid threshold, city administrator authority, et cetera. These are a couple other sort of related items we'd like to make consistent with that. I'll let Mike kind of walk through those, and we'll be glad
Yeah,
to take any questions from you.
Yeah, I'll actually go through both items, but what applies really to both items is when we develop financial guidance, it has helped to use standardized, consistent thresholds that are not only familiar to finance, but that are familiar to the departments as well. And what we found is the threshold that they use most often is the purchasing threshold. So what finance did is we went through and located where we had thresholds that now differ from the purchasing threshold. And the first one is this item, and it would need to be changed by ordinance. And I guess our request is possibly a recommendation without a vote, Eric, to the full board for approval.
Without the quorum, they can't really
Without the
act, so
quorum,
we'll
they
just
can't
move,
act.
we'll just move it on to the
yeah.
agenda.
Okay.
For the next August meeting.
Okay.
And place it on probably new business. Yes, sir. Since it will not have been voted on at the committee.
And currently, the administrative budget action in the ordinance is currently 25,000, and the request is to raise it to 50,000. And what the administrative budget action does, it doesn't create new budget. It simply allows the city administrator to administratively transfer budget within a fund, not between funds. And an example would be is, let's say that there was something budgeted in finance within the threshold, and it looked like it fit better under IT. The city administrator could transfer that amount from the finance budget to the IT budget under this administrative authority. So what we're asking is, it's currently 25,000. Would the board approve it to be raised to 50,000 to meet the new purchasing threshold?
Jason?
Thank you, sir. So, quick question is, you talk about the new purchasing threshold.
Yes.
And you said that, you're trying to align the two.
Yes.
How does it align with other organizations or municipalities outside of Franklin when is there a standard is where I guess I'm going with this?
In fact, I think other governments try to do the same. I don't know specific examples, but in essence, to be able to provide that guidance, we know, like with Nashville, we know that they had that same purchasing threshold that we have. So in essence, to me, it's one by having those consistent thresholds. That way, when you're providing the guidance or even trying to use the guidance, you have something you're comfortable with.
And
So
this is approved through state legislative authority. I mean, this is rooted in that, right? Based in the
Yeah.
states provided that and provides that authority to
Exactly.
cities that have a professional or centralized purchasing function.
Yes,
So this is really just a municipality best practice.
exactly.
And we're just taking that next step in that best practice approach.
Exactly.
Correct.
Perfect.
And with it being an ordinance, it would actually be 2 readings at the board level.
So put it on the board for the first vote, but in the workshop, any discussion that you need to do with that?
Well, we'll take the guidance here. It's a fairly straightforward item. I think we were thinking about putting it on new business, just without a vote from the committee. That way it doesn't go on consent, but it's on new business. It'll take 2 votes anyway.
Yes.
So that way it keeps it moving. So I think you'd see it on the voting meeting for first reading at the August 23rd meeting, if that's okay with the
That was
committee.
that was the intent.
Okay, good.
Yeah. Any other questions? You think you've covered 3 and 4?
I was actually going to maybe just say a few other things
Go
about
ahead.
item 4, because just like, we're trying to align the budget, we also have these same thresholds in policies and procedures. And using those same thresholds of 20,000 and 50,000, we currently, in a lot of the policies, have 10,000 and 25,000. So there would actually be 4 policies and procedures that would be updated. And in the capital assets policy, it would actually change the threshold for financial inventory and capital equipment that we use for audit. In the grants policy, it would change the amount for requesting grant reimbursements. In the internal control documentation, it would actually change the threshold for disbursements and purchasing. And finally, in the lease policy, it would actually establish a threshold. When we passed that policy, we weren't sure what would be permissible as a threshold. We now know that 50,000 would be a permissible threshold.
Okay.
So it would actually update those in those 4 policies and procedures.
I think my only comment to that, since we're not going to be able to vote on it at the committee level and it's going to go in front of BOMA, is, Eric, if you, a question might arise of we're doubling this number. We're moving from 25 to 50 or from 10 to 20. And for some people, that might be a significant jump when you're doubling something. Is if we have examples so that people or BOMA will also understand as we go to consider it for the vote of why this is important, and maybe also some understanding of what we faced in the past when we actually needed this authority or this capability to do this.
Okay, yeah, this is really a companion to the action the board's already taken, so it helps us streamline a process, get elements put in place in terms of a purchase more timely. We still are seeking value in what we do, but we're just not encumbering lower dollar transactions with a more time-consuming process. So I think that's really what we're trying to achieve overall, and this cleans that up a little further. But we'll be glad to provide that.
Any other questions or comments? Then let's go to item 5, consideration of draft ordinance 2022-28, an ordinance to amend the budget for fiscal year 2022-2023.
Mr. Chairman, Alderman, and our lovely Facebook audience.
Yes.
I'm saying that because I know my mother is actually watching in
She's
Canada.
watching.
So, hi.
A little red heart just appeared on the
I know, right?
screen there.
We're going to drive impressions up any way we can, Eric. Ordinance 2022-28 is the first of what we expect to be several ordinances to amend the fiscal 23 operating and capital budget. This amendment, just to kind of remind folks at home and here in the room, generally our amendments fall in 3 categories throughout the year. The first one primarily takes care of stuff that we didn't get accomplished in the prior year and the distribution of annual wage increases. And as you see, those are the first 2 amendments which are covered in this ordinance. Then there's always minor corrections and cleanups. That's usually part of this amendment, and then our middle amendments during the fiscal year. The final amendment is the final cleanup, and that can be small. It can also be very large. Last year, if you recall, the 4th Amendment to the budget moved or increased expenses by nearly $10 million because of the favorable revenue position we were in and the desire to move money into places like capital projects and capital vehicle fund and street aid fund, et cetera. The other aspect of this ordinance, and it is why it is 68 pages long, is that it amends all staffing tables in the approved budget. When we went to you with this approved budget, or proposed budget, I should say, in mid-May, you had not approved the new compensation plan and all of the changes therein. 72% of employees had different letter grades. So all of those old tables have to be updated, and that's what this amendment, really this ordinance gets to, and that's why it is so lengthy of an ordinance. Briefly, by fund. As I said, and as we go down through this presentation in your memos, you'll note the numbers tie to the aspects of the amendment. In the general fund, stormwater fund, sanitation fund, and water management fund, there is the movement of over $8 million from one aspect of the fund to all of the respective departments where people are budgeted, which is the total amount of the wage increases as approved by you when you adopted Resolution 22-45, that new compensation plan, and effective July 1 at the beginning of the new fiscal year. Second, in the general fund, and this is also a recurring theme, speaking on what we spoke about in item 2 today, delayed acquisition of equipment. There are numerous pieces of equipment, both in the general fund as well as in sanitation and in several other areas, facilities tax, that were budgeted either in fiscal 22 or even in fiscal 21 that we have been unable to take acquisition of, and we do expect to do so in the next 3 to 6 months. And so we are moving funds that, in essence, fell to fund balance in most of these funds in order to buy the pieces of equipment that we had intended to buy. We've just waited for the ability to get them. Third, in the general fund, you approved the creation, as per Eric's request, for an emergency management function and dedicated individuals. As we began to really go through that process and work with those two fine individuals, we realized that it should have its own budget, rather than just kind of adding it onto admin and then having to divide out where to account for it. So this budget creates the emergency management budget. It's about $300,000. There's only $61,000 of actual additional expenses being requested because we're moving salaries from the admin budget into it. We're moving expenses which were charged off to the fire department or admin budget or what have you to make up the rest of that. So it's not $300,000 of new money. It's only about $60,000. And that will cover things not only such as professional development and travel and other ancillary expenses, but directly emergency management responsible functions such as our maintenance of tornado sirens, for example. There's a decrease of $445,000 to account for right-sizing, if you will, or truing up the interfund reimbursements. It is a standard accounting practice in budgeting that we account for indirect costs for services provided by other departments in the general fund, aka a portion of the time of all of the people who are paid a salary here at this table, to your utility funds. This is done in recognition of the fact that part of Eric's time, part of Christine's time, part of Mike's time, part of Margaret's time, part of my time serves building budgets and accounting for monies and administration of water management, sanitation, and stormwater. And it's fundamentally cheaper than water management having its own city administrator and its own CFO and its own accountant and its own budgeting person. We did not get that accomplished for the fiscal 23 budget. We were still using the fiscal 22 formulas. So this trues that up. So you do see expenses increasing in those funds, but it results in a net gain for the general fund. And then finally, miscellaneous additional charges, software purchases, staffing, being able to make sure we can hire an individual that you approved a few months earlier to take advantage of an opportunity, and some computer replacements and upgrades. In the street aid fund, we used bond funds to close out 2019 to pave some streets. In fact, those streets were Del Rio and Downs Boulevard in the first half of this year, and that delayed certain amounts of paving in other areas. That money fell to the bottom line in the street aid fund at year end, and so we are appropriating $800,000 of funds so that we can do additional paving this year and try to do as much as we can to catch up on what we can with positive rates. In sanitation, we have received a grant. You've seen this in the past, the Volkswagen grant to purchase an electric fueled trash packer. So that's 100% offset, so it's $417,843 on the revenue side and a matching side on the expense. In addition, we are appropriating $121,000 for a trash packer that you first approved 2 years ago because we can finally get a hold of it. And then again, minor corrections in the interfund reimbursement and truing up the amount of money necessary to service the debt, which Christine identified in her presentation for improvements to this Century Court facility. In the Road Impact Fund, we have a transfer of $3,300,000 for acquisition of land and right-of-way for the Long Lane Old Peytonsville Road project. That was a total of $4.2 million that we settled on in order to purchase land for that project. You'll see that on the capital projects in total. The balance of that $4.2 million came from the remainder of the 2019 Series A bonds. And then minor corrections. In the city facilities tax, there's again delayed acquisition of a vehicle and trailer for parks, which was budgeted a year ago. Stormwater is the wage increases and minor corrections in the interfund reimbursement. Hotel motel is the appropriation of ARPA monies and for two projects. Number one, ARPA monies to cover the parking garage counter system, which we did not get done before June 30th, but have actively been working. IT's been doing a great job with that in July and August. And then money to complete the wayfinding sign initiative. Again, you appropriated that via budget amendment last year, but that has not gotten done due to supply delays. And so we are able to take care of that this fiscal year. The item in the capital projects fund, as I indicated, is shown there. And then water management is, again, simply transfers of wage increases and interfund reimbursements. On the screen is the net fund balance changes. There is no change in the fund balance of the general fund and the capital projects fund. All other funds show decreases. That is simply attributable, though, in many of those cases, to those funds that have fallen as a result of not being expensed in a prior year, and we are simply moving them forward to be able to expend them this year. And as I said, the organizational chart changes make up the vast majority of this ordinance, but this will, quote unquote, true up and make correct what you voted on and the positions in the org charts. So we have a very clear, transparent demonstration and presentation of all staffing in the city. Mr. Chairman, I'm happy to stand for any questions.
Mr. Chair, I do not have any questions at this time.
Mr. Young, neither do I.
Very good.
Well
Good
done.
enough. Let's go to item 6 then. Monthly reports. Mike and Margaret, you're up. Margaret, you're
I
up.
think it's my turn. 40% increase over 2021, and May to May of 21, 15% higher than May of last year in sales tax. I also want to point your attention to road impact fees. We are 52% higher in road impact fees than this time as of June 30th, 2021. Of course, that's all due to development and timing. Hotel motel, 98% higher than this time last year, thanks to the rebounding of travel and tourism and everything that's been coming back to town. And last but not least, our conference center. If you remember, our June profit last year was $163, but this year we were $29,256. So that gives us a city profit for FY22 of $414,000 from the conference center.
And I think we shared with you recently, that's the highest profit or money we've cleared from the conference center in at least the last 5 fiscal years. So it's a strong year and a strong rebound after one of only a few negative years in 2020 due to the pandemic. So that's good news and good activity out there. And all indications are that trend is continuing from what I've heard from management out at the conference center.
Do y'all have any other questions?
I do not.
And I do not. I'm just sitting here thinking, if we'd have gotten the RNC, we'd have filled all those rooms up. Thank you, Nashville. Is any other business come before this committee? Any other questions or comments? I see the mayor. Well, then let's go ahead and adjourn. And since we do not have a quorum, I don't guess we'll vote on the adjournment.
I say adjourn.
We are adjourned.